Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on migrating web help to Magellan. Just while we wait for everyone to connect and jump on board, take a couple of minutes for that. I'd like to just wish you all the best. I hope you're all keeping safe and healthy in this environment. And looks like we might see an end to this in 2021. So let's hope for that. A Happy New Year to everyone, and the best wishes for 2021. Today, my name is Paul Trotter, and today I will be presenting this Migrating Web Help to Magellan webinar in conjunction with my colleague, Mr. Peter Stroes. Peter is based in our Dutch office, just outside of Utrecht and Soest. And I'm based down under in New Zealand, where we are incredibly lucky to be saved from most of the side effects of COVID. Being an island, it's kind of easy to isolate ourselves away from the world and manage it down here. So, but we feel for everyone and all the pain that we're all going through. So let's kick off and talk about what we want to cover today. In our first webinar on Magellan, we talked a lot about the different capabilities of Magellan, and then we talked about in our second webinar some of the more details on theming. And today we're just going to talk about how you transition your current web help projects to Magellan. Now, we appreciate we jumped the gun a bit with our deprecation of web help, and I hope we've corrected that, giving you guys another year to get it sorted out. We'll start off today's webinar by just giving another brief overview of Magellan for those of you who haven't gone to the other webinars, which you can get recordings of on our website. Then we'll go through a little demo showing you how to create and publish a Magellan site and convert from an existing web help site. We'll talk about the differences in context-sensitive linking for those of you using Magellan for software context-sensitive help. And then a little bit about getting buy-in to making the change from other folks in your organization. And then we'll end up with some Q&A. You notice I've got my camera on today, just wanted to give you a face and name and say hello. But once we move into the presentation, I'll just flick that off because I've actually got to look at a different screen and it makes it a bit odd, me looking sideways. So I'll do that in just a minute. So without further ado, let's get started. You know, if we look at what is Author-It, now I know most of you are very experienced Author-It users, but our product is constantly evolving. And so I just want to make sure you guys are always kept informed of what we're doing and kind of the scope of the product. Author-It's always been an end-to-end solution focused on the creation, management, and delivery of content in a component-driven single source way. What we've really expanded over the years is the way in which people can contribute, you know, whether you're reviewing or you're a contributor or a author or a designer. We've got different interfaces that allow you to participate. And a lot of the change over recent years is focused on helping less technical folks start to participate in the creation and review process of your content in such a way that they don't damage or break the content that you've spent so long creating. It's really important, and we all know from experience that when you send people a document that you might have spent a lot of time working on, it's very easy for them to damage it. So Author provides a way for them to do that in a safe way that you can manage. Once the content's in that repository, you can manage all of the reuse, the translations, the workflows, security, and so on. And then ultimately, we're here to deliver the content that you want to supply your customers. So giving you the ability to deliver a variety of different outputs, including print, help, web, mobile. And the latest addition has been e-learning. So SCORM-based e-learning, presentations, and micro-learning. So that's where a lot of what we've added to the product in the last few years. So if you're not familiar with any of those things, please let us know and we'll be happy to show you. Okay, so what is Magellan? And this is the same slide I've used in other presentations. So the big difference between Magellan and WebHelp is that Magellan is actually a designed as an HTML5 application. So what's HTML5? It's a combination of JavaScript, CSS, and of course the latest HTML standard. And it's an application that dynamically loads content rather than having pre-generated HTML pages. And it gives us significantly more ability to change that content as it's being loaded. It also allows us to deliver content that can look great on any kind of device, whether it's a desktop, tablet, or smartphone. And a good application like this is what's called adaptive, which means it changes its shape and size depending on the device you're working on, and responsive, that it smoothly transitions between those sizes. So if you're currently delivering WebHelp, you'll just have a more desktop focused application. WebHelp is going to give you the ability to deliver that content to more modern devices and do so in a very, very nice way. We still have that modern, that sort of tri-pane view that help authors have known for many years, but we've also added to that a modern landing page, which gives people a sort of a place to be introduced into your content and a point at which they can jump to different parts of it. Lots of navigation facilities in the product as well, and then a ton of configuration options that let you change and adjust the product to suit your own needs, along with extensive theming. And that theming is based on really standards-based CSS that gives you huge amounts of options for how you make the look and feel. Again, we covered all of this stuff off in great detail in our previous webinars. So just jump onto our website and you'll find those webinars there, along with any content that you need to help you go through it. So one of the other new things about Magellan is a completely new rendering process. I know this is a bit technical and back end, but it has some really big advantages for you guys, the user. In the first iteration of web-based outputs, Author used a very traditional approach of extracting content directly from our database and turning that into HTML, which at the time was the best way to do things and performed well. New modern technologies have allowed us to now extract that content in what we call resolved XML format. We then can use modern XSLT processing and a modern XSLT processing engine called Saxon to deliver a combination of data files, which we then combine with our Magellan application to deliver the online help. And this is significantly faster and more flexible than the type of publishing we previously did. And of course, you combine that with all of your external media files, documents, images, videos, and so on. And then when you pull all of that together, you get a great experience for your end user. So Magellan's not just the look and feel, it's also the process, and you'll have significantly faster publishing with more flexibility using Magellan than you do with WebHelp. Okay, so we're now going to just pop into a demo I've got set up for you guys. These are the steps we're going to walk through. We're going to go through creating a book, reusing content from your existing WebHelp site. We're going to move some content around because we've got new features such as the landing page in Magellan, which let you have a home for stuff that people just put in the contents before. And that includes promoted content. And then we'll look at the results and just discuss a little the theming and logos and stuff that you can change. So without further ado, I'll just kill my video now and we'll walk into the demo so you guys can have a look. Okay. Right. So I'm over here in Author, and in my folder here, I've got my teleportation device users guide, and that's my main document. And this is typically what I use to produce my PDF. So I've got all of my content in here. And to make things simple from a reuse point of view, in my online help center, which is a WebHelp output, I've simply embedded the user's guide in there. And so when it publishes, it just grabs that and uses it. And that works really well for WebHelp. I'm just going to pop over and show you what that looks like. So here in my browser, I've got the WebHelp open and up. And this is just the default out-of-the-box WebHelp that you can see here. So the typical tri-pane view and index contents and a basic search. So now we want to transform this into Magellan. And some of you might think this is a difficult process, but it's actually really, really easy. And it's a very simple step. So the first step is I'm going to create a new book. I'm going to start with going to my Magellan templates. Now, if you have not installed the Magellan templates, you'll need to do those first, and that is covered in the first video webinar on Magellan. Once you've brought up this is a new feature we introduced earlier this year, and this is going to be my teleportation. And we're going to call this the Magellan site, okay? You can call it whatever you want, of course. I've got a template which defaults to adding or reusing certain content in here. It's going to create a whole bunch of promoted content starting points for me, and it's going to reuse all of my front and back matter that I typically use. I could add my metadata here if I had, if I wanted to, or had different metadata, and then it's a simple case of creating the book. This is a standard form for creating books, so it's you can use it for any type of book. So you can see here, I've now got my landing page content automatically populated. And the simplest thing I could do is to do exactly what we had in the WebHelp, and simply grab this teleportation device user's guide and just plonk it in here, right? And having done that, all I need to do now is save the book and go to my publish and publish Magellan Help Center, and that will now create for me a Magellan site with exactly the same content in the same order that I had it in my WebHelp site. Now, whether you're doing this on premises or on cloud, the process is the same. I'm going to pop over to my cloud publishing panel, and I can see that publishing now here, and it's going to come through in just a sec. So the difference here is that I may want to change some things around to take advantage of some of the features that Magellan has, which WebHelp did not. But first, let's just have a look at the result. And the Magellan site, when it first loads for the very first time, either for you or your users, it'll cache a whole bunch of images and JavaScript files. So it takes a little bit longer on the first load, but after that, it's pretty snappy. So you'll see here, I've got my front page is loaded, and I can pop across into the contents, but you'll see things like the copyright, disclaimer, warnings, it's all in there, like it was in WebHelp. By default, Magellan moves into what's called a scrollable or infinite scroll mode, so I can just scroll through the application. You can see I'm hosting video in there. I've seen the tracking down the left-hand side, and I can also see the tracking down the right-hand side as well. I've got my index and I've got my glossary, which not only creates these pop-ups inside the content, but also gives me that same content in here for me to look at. So that's pretty basic, right? But I want to just make a few changes and show you some of the things you'll do to take advantage of this new capability. One of them is I actually don't want to include everything in here. So whether I create another subbook with just the content I want, or I do it by just moving the content in here, I'm just going to first remove that. I'm also going to remove the index because I want to actually use the index that I've already got in my book because it's already got all of my entries in it. And I'm just going to grab this content and just pop it in here, right? So that you'll notice I haven't put the copyright notice and so on in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that content, the warning and the disclaimer. I've already got the copyright notice. I'm just going to pop that into my landing page footer, because that's a better place for that content to be. It's not something that people need to see all the time. The other thing I want to do is I want to use these landing page promoted content blocks as a shortcut to the different sections in my book. So using those is pretty straightforward. I'll give you an example with this one here. So getting started, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. The first way I'm going to use is you could use an embedded topic. So I could put, grab that and simply embed the content that is in that topic right here, and then it'll create a link to that location. Now, at the moment, I've got this on a comment style. You can, of course, you just set that to whatever style you want in there. That's one way of doing it. And then if you wanted a link to that content, you can drop a link into it, either above or below. As long as that link is in here, it will be a link to the entire tile. But for me, another way to do it is to actually just copy the text. So I can do the same action, drag and drop, and do a paste as text function there. And now I'll change the heading. Let's call that. So getting started with teleportation, and I'm going to just pop a link onto this text here. So again, I just use my drag and drop and create a link using, I can use an existing one or create a new one. Right, so that's all I have to do, save that topic, and I've now created a landing page tile, essentially, that I want to use to link from the front page. So I'll save that, and I will republish this, and you will see that sort of take effect in the output. So you can go through that that process for all of your different types of landing page tiles. You can have as many as you want in there. And many of our users that have already moved to Magellan have really made a great use of those. Plus the rotators, you can have as many rotators as you want in here, and they spin, display up to 3 on the screen at once, and then rotate the rest. So again, I'm going to just, I've just republished that. So that's publishing in the background. It's now complete. And view that result. Now, sometimes with Magellan, because of the way caching works on your browser, you may need to refresh cache to get everything to fix. So when you do that, the best key combination in most browsers is Control-Shift and then R. Some browsers are very, very stubborn with their cache. Chrome is one of those, so you may actually need to use a private browser window or just tell it to stop caching content. So now when that tile is in there, all I have to do now is click on it, and it takes me directly to that place in the document. You'll see the copyright stuff is now gone. I've still got my menu here, and I've got my navigation down here. If I go back to the heading, you'll see that the header is now, sorry, the footer here has now got my warnings. It's got my disclaimer topic in there as well. The search, of course, works just like it does in WebHelp, except the search in Magellan is a little bit different in terms of how it appears. You get the search pane appearing up here, and you can then, while it remains open, move from different places. Now, this really starts to show its strength when you get to different browser sizes. I'll try to. Zoom's not terribly good at showing a transition. So I'll show you that when you're in this sort of desktop mode, you're here. And then as you transition through different sizes, it will automatically adjust. You'll see the contents has disappeared at this breakpoint. The actual search has been removed, and this is essentially a tablet view. And then as you get smaller, it's changed again. And then as you get smaller again, it's now moved into a phone. And all of the features that were available on the widget panel now appear here, and the search will slide across as a pane, which still works in the same way, but you've got it slidden across. If you imagine you're using your phone, and then you get to the location. If you want your contents, you can also get access to those. So the home page still works as well. Okay, that gives you a bit of a look at how this all works, and how simple it is to convert your WebHelp project to Magellan. Now, in terms of customizing logos and themes and so on, It's pretty straightforward. I'll show you just in Cloud how you'd go about doing this, but the process is exactly the same on premises. So you would find the location where your templates, your Magellan templates are stored. There are, typically they should be installed under your templates folder and a folder called Magellan Themes. So Magellan works on a theme concept. By default, we have a whole bunch of themes, which you can choose to use. So if we did an example, go back to my Magellan book that we created, I'll just republish this. And this time I'll choose a different theme. I'll choose the, say, blue theme and go ahead and publish. And so then that will now publish the same book, but with a different theme. And if we look at the folders, it's now going to grab the theme information out of this folder, as opposed to grabbing, before it was grabbing the theme information out of this folder. And there's a bunch of things you can override in the theme. You can override logos, graphics, any images, and most importantly, you can create theme for your content and theme for the application. And again, the subject of theming is covered extensively off in our previous webinars. And this is also where you stick your configuration file. So you decide what features you want on, off, available, not available. And if we refresh this guy now, you'll see it's going to be published exactly the same content, different logo, and it's going to be also in a different theme, which is the default blue theme. Right, and it's pretty simple to do all of those changes as well. Great, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in terms of the demo. So I'll just move back to my presentation now, and we'll go through the rest of what I wanted to cover. Right, so we covered off the book, the reusing of content from your existing WebHelp book, the moving of content around, your promoted content pages, publishing and viewing the results, and finally an overview of themes and logos. Next, I want to look at context-sensitive linking. Now, many of you use WebHelp for context-sensitive linking, and I just want to point out the differences. The primary differences is that Magellan supports more capabilities than WebHelp, and the URL pattern is slightly different. So in WebHelp, the URL pattern is quite simple. You have the web server name, a hash followed by a file name. Now, the default file name is taken from this field in the topic, provided you start a new page. But if you don't specify a file name, then the default file name is the object ID plus the extension HTML. And let's go have a quick look at that in the browser. So if we go back to our current WebHelp, you'll see up in the browser, this here is 538.html. That's the object ID of that object. But if you do provide a file name like I have in this topic, it actually uses the file name, in this case test.html. If you just put a file name and no extension, again, it will default to HTML rather than HTML. If we look at that in Author It, and I look at that topic and look at the properties, you'll see that I have actually specified here test HTML in that field. So that's how the linking works in WebHelp, very simple. Now, by contrast, if we look at the Magellan way it works, is that first of all, there's two places you can call. You can call either the landing page or the content pages. For context-sensitive help, you'll most likely be calling the content pages, in which case you've got an object ID. That's by default, it uses the object ID. But again, if you specify a file name, it will use the file name from here in this instead of the object ID. But unlike WebHelp, there will be no default extension. So it's whatever you put in this field, extension or no extension, that's what will appear here. In addition to that, we also have two other fields, the locale ID. And so that's taken from the Magellan configuration file. And the configuration file defines all of your locales you've got available. There must be at least one. And then the publications under those locales. So this is my English publication and my standard version of it. I don't have to have more than one version, but you do have to have the first one. The the version can, or these IDs can be either characters like I've got them here, or they can be numbers or a combination of either. So I've just used numbers because I think they're, sorry, characters because they're easier to use than numbers. So if we go back and look at how that manifests in the URL, is we have here, again, we go to the same place, so we get a combination. You'll see you've got the hash, the home, followed by the object ID. And in this case, because I published to this theme, it's using the numbers. Let me just republish this to the previous theme, which I've got set up to use those. I've got set up to use the characters that I showed you. So again, if I just publish this out to Magellan, and this time I'll do it again to my Acme theme, then I'll be able to show you what I mean. So those numbers or codes are something that you define as part of your config file setup when you're creating the site. So you have enormous flexibility on how you choose to do that, and it's predominantly changing that URL pattern or how the help is called that you'll have to adapt. You shouldn't have to change any of the actual IDs or file names that you've used, just the pattern. So if we go in here again, just refresh that. That's what I mean by caching. It often holds on to things. And once we're in here, I can get to my getting started. And you'll see now that the pattern uses that test HTML and then the EN standard, or if I'm in here, the 538 and the EN standard. So that's the pattern. The rest is my web server URL, which would be wherever you install it. Okay, so that gives you a pretty good idea of how the context sensitive linking works. Again, pretty simple and not a lot of change, but just more capability. Now, getting buy-in. Buy-in, what I mean by that is getting support from your internal stakeholders and external stakeholders on moving to Magellan. I understand that sometimes this is difficult, especially if you've got a lot of history and a lot of different applications using it. But there's lots of reasons that you should move to Magellan and adopt it. The first is that it supports modern standards-based HTML5. And as browsers evolve and change, you've got to remain current with the current standards. Magellan is the replacement for WebHelp, and it is using the latest standards. WebHelp is now quite old, and so the browser support for that will start to fail if you don't move. Primary reason we're moving away from it is the provider of the framework that we use is no longer supporting that framework, so we have to move off it. The Magellan application can be hosted by any web server, public facing or behind authentication. So it doesn't require any complex web or server-side infrastructure to install. Everything is client-side, which means everything that's running, including the search, is running inside the browser using JavaScript. So literally your IT department can drop it into any web server and it will operate on existing infrastructure. There's no requirements on the server for it. You can dump it on a AWS host or any web server that you can rent, or you can distribute it with your web applications. It works, but it will not run locally on a desktop without a web server. And the reason for that is browser security in modern browsers just won't allow a browser to communicate directly with your desktop machine. So that option has been taken away from us, even though it used to work in the past. As I pointed out before, it's adaptive and responsive. So you will now, by moving to Magellan, get support for displaying your content nicely in desktop, tablet, and smartphone. And particularly if you're supporting an application that needs that also supports smartphone and tablet, this will be a big improvement to the way you can display your online help. The powerful CSS theming will allow you to better support the company and product branding requirements. So the customization on WebHelp was limited. The customization in Magellan is much more extensive. So your product management will have a lot more scope for how they deploy and how they brand and theme Magellan to suit their needs. And of course, the context-sensitive linking has now been extended to support languages and content variants. So again, you'll be able to utilize those in your context-sensitive linking that you didn't have before. So lots of great reasons for wanting to move. And if you guys need any help building a business case to convince your product management or IT people to make this move, then please let us know. And we're more than happy to provide you with documentation and help to do that. I'm sure my colleague Peter would love to hear from you and give you that information. But we've also got a great support desk that can help you out. Now, before we move on to our Q&A, I wanted to give you guys some good news. Now, last Magellan webinar, I put up a slide of all of the things that's been requested for improvements in Magellan, and I wanted to let you know an update on those requests and what we've done. So everything on this slide we have built in the last couple of months, and we will be releasing to you in our next release, which is due out in late Feb, early March timeframe. It has been completed. I've seen the developments, everything's working, and it is just going through our regression testing and QA procedures. So we have added support for link targets on landing page that let you jump out of the landing page in your browser windows and things like that. We've added configuration options that let you set the initial expansion state of your table of contents and the number of levels that you want to display in your table of contents or menu navigation. We've extended the footer so that you can include not just topics, but links as well, so you can link to other URLs. The footers themselves, we've extended that to allow the footer to be separately configured to appear in either landing mode and or content mode. I know many of you wanted to have the footer in all pages so that you could display appropriate privacy, GDPR kind of statements in there. And so that's now going to be available for you. Infinite scroll mode, we've added an option that will switch between infinite scroll mode and page scroll mode. So when you're in a page mode, it will display a page defined by the start new page item, just like it did for WebHelp. And this can be defined separately for mobile and desktop. The thought process is you may want to have a page by page mode in desktop, but once you're on a mobile, you want to move to a infinite scroll mode. So that's available. We've extended our support for search languages to include both Japanese and Arabic, and the configuration for the social media buttons so you can choose which ones you want on or off. And the last sort of feature, it's what we realized as we were introducing all of these new configuration options is that many of you that's set up your site config files in the theme suddenly won't get them because they're not going to be in there. So now this configuration file behaves much the same way as the CSS files do. So we will have a default site config, which represents our defaults for everything. And then you will now override those with your theme config, which will now be present in the theme folder. And you don't have to specify all the configuration options, only the ones you want to override or change. So that's a little bit of an update in terms of how it's set up. During the upgrade process, we will fix that for you automatically. Lots and lots of bug fixes. And you will also notice we've updated some of the underlying libraries in Magellan for those of you that had concerns over security and some of the older JavaScript libraries we were using. Those have now been updated, so those security concerns have been addressed. And that kind of brings us to the end of what I wanted to share for you. Again, that we listened to what you wanted, we've done it, and I encourage you all to visit our community where you can provide more suggestions, you can discuss suggestions that your colleagues and other users have made as well, along with our friendly authorate staff who are often on the community answering questions too. And that kind of brings us to our final part of the evening, which, or my evening, your morning, which is the question and answer session. So I'm going to ask my colleague Peter to help me out during this session, and we'll try and address your Q&A now. So Peter, if you would mind just sort of
guide you through.
Guide me through. Yep, that'd be great.
Paul. Yeah, we got some great questions and some good technical questions. So I'm really glad that you are here. I don't have to answer them. But let's get started with a question from Alexander. They've noticed performance issues with a very large data set using Magellan. So the question is, so would you have any strategies or suggestions to improve performance?
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. We have looked at some of the performance issues there, and we'll continue to do so. Of course, any assistance you can provide us in terms of showing us where things are slowing down, we'll be more than happy to sort of work with you on that. The key performance one we've found is the large search, and it typically only affects the initial download because it downloads a large JSON file which incorporates all of your search content. And that's where we see the biggest search or the biggest delay. Again, we're looking for ways to componentize all of these JSON files so we can progressively load them. But of course, we'll continue to improve this as we go along. That's the best I can offer right now. But please share them with us, share them with our support team so that the developers can have a look at it.
Thank you, Paul. Then Carol asks whether it's possible to publish a Magellan book without the landing page, particularly for online help.
Yeah, so the ability to turn the landing page off has not been added yet, but we do get that request, so this is something on our radar. At the moment, Carol, if you just want to target specifically the content page without the landing page, just put the URL to your site to go directly to the content and skip going to the landing page, and then it will go directly to the content. So back when I talked about the context sensitive linking, there's two URLs, one which hits the content and one which hits the landing page. So just use the one that hits the landing page, the content, and you won't see the landing page. But we will be adding a configuration option to turn off the landing page if you don't want to use it.
Okay, thanks. Sebastian is asking a question about the Magellan URLs. Object ID is still the base variant ID. So the question is whether it stays the same for all variants and local variants.
Yeah, so the way that we've done variants in Magellan is not to change the ID, but when I talked about the context-sensitive linking, you can include locale and variants as part of that. So the idea with Magellan is you publish out content for each variant and language that you want to have, and they all live in different folders. And then that combination of variant and language code then tells Magellan which set of content to load up. That's how you do it now. In the future, we'll be adding a better way, easier way for the user to self-select switching themselves.
Okay, thanks. And Rita's asking, the context-sensitive help points to the pages via topic ID, and she wonders whether that will stay upright, or whether that will stay work, or whether it will mean a lot of work for the developers to change that for Magellan.
If you're currently using WebHelp, it'll be the same ID that you're using at the moment. The only thing that will change will be the URL pattern around it. So for the developers, if they have hard-coded the full URL into their code, which I doubt they have, it would mean a global find and replace. However, it's likely that they've simply got a call they make, which they then call with some kind of ID. So you should be able to use the same linking and do a find and replace for the pattern that it links to. There should be no need to substitute the linking for the developers. But if you have a more specific question on that, I suggest you just log a ticket with our support desk and they can give you clear instructions on what to do.
She said it's just the ID, indeed. So thanks. Then Sebastian is asking what the publishing folder looks like, whether there are still separate HTMs for each topic, so they can call individually.
Yeah, so we do produce a folder full of HTML files. It's under the content folder. That's how the application works. It actually uses JavaScript to load the individual HTML pages and put them into the framework that displays them. So once you publish it, if you go into the content folder, there'll be a subfolder there that's got the various content. And the idea is you create different folders for different languages and or variants in there, and they're mapped to from the config file. We had this exact question this morning, Suzanne. So yes, the key, what you need to do to determine support for your language is pop over the search engine we use for Magellan is one called Luna, like solar but dimmer, and it's all JavaScript based. So just search for Luna on the web, LUNR, and on that website you will find the languages that they provide native support for, and that's the ones that we also support. As they release new support for it, we will incorporate that into the product. I'm pretty confident that Russian is in there, and Chinese and Japanese, fundamentally from a language structural perspective, they are similar. So I believe those work as well. But just pop in and have a look.
Thank you. Stephanie is asking about web server. So you mentioned that launching is only possible from web server. Does it mean that the local host web server option is no longer possible?
No, Stephanie, local host is a web server, so that's fine. It works just fine. In fact, when you install it by default, it will try to find your local host and publish to it. The default scripts are set up to move things to your local host. That's what I use on my computer, just the standard IIS local host. But that is a full-blown web server. It's no different. It's just on a different machine.
Okay. Then Martin is asking a question about content security policy. So we're looking to add a content security policy which tells a browser the types of script it can run and what scripts it should block to prevent cross-site scripting attacks. We want to block unsafe inline script blocks from being run. Currently, WebHelp using Authored 6 uses this inline script blocks. Does Magellan use this inline script blocks?
Great question, Martin, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. It definitely, if you're talking about references from the HTML, so from the main page, or you might be referring with script blocks inside the HTML itself. I don't believe it uses the inline script blocks, but I think we better make sure, again, if you don't mind just logging a ticket to support, then that'll get into a ticket and our developers can answer that question for you with certainty.
Thanks. And Lex asks about online web help outputs. They're embedded in their application here, Docker files that they deploy in application server Kubernetes. Will it continue to work with the Magellan outputs?
Yeah, great question, Lex. And there's no reason that I can see why Docker would not work. It's just a set of files. All execution occurs in the browser, just like it does with WebHelp. So there should be no difference in that I can think of.
He's also asking about they only use online on-topic help for their application web pages to link directly to help topics in the online web help. Is that supported by Magellan?
If I understand the question correctly, Lex, you'll be either docking your help in another frame like an iframe, or and then calling it into another window, and using the context sensitive linking, you should be able to direct it to a specific topic and call that.
Paul, you were lost for a few seconds, at least from my side. Can you please repeat your answer?
If I'm understanding the question right, I think you will be calling WebHelp to display a particular topic using the URL. And Magellan, you can do the same thing. You'll need to host the Magellan application inside an iframe or another tab, but it should work the same way. If you're talking about just reading the raw HTML pages and displaying those in your own kind of div, then we'll need to discuss how that can be done. It can be done because there are HTML pages there, but you just need a different approach than using the context sensitive linking. So again, just drop us a note on the support and we can investigate that in more detail for you.
Then I have one more question, Paul, at this stage. That's from Mia, and she's looking for the Magellan templates. Where can on-premise customers find those templates to download?
Mia, I believe they're either distributed with the actual install somewhere, and you just have to get them from the right place, or they're available from the download page in the community. Either way, just log a support call, and the team will help you out there with the right answer. Some templates that I've used in the demos are available on the video page on the website, but they're more for just for the demos.
Okay. One additional question came in. Stephanie asking whether we covered multi-language output in another Magellan webinar. I think we did. If not, could you briefly show how it's done?
So we did cover it in one of the other webinars, but I'm happy to talk about it again now. Essentially, Stephanie, you publish each language, right? They by default will be published in their separate Magellan sites. You have to choose one of those sites to be the master, and then create a separate folder under the content folder of the published site for each language, and just drop the content into each one of those sites. So let me just briefly show you the structure. So when a Magellan site is published, you end up with, I'll go to my publishing page, and this is the Magellan help here. We've got a site is published. So this is typically the folder structure. You'll get all of your main folders in here, and you have a content folder. Under the content folder, default, you'll have this EN folder. And when you publish, say, French, you would create a new folder under here, and from the French version which you've published, and in author it, when you publish it, you'll end up with French, German, whichever language under here. But you choose one of those to be your main output, and you add a content folder for each language and or variant. And then in your site config, you define what that folder is. And that's what I've defined here. My site config folder looks like this. And I've got my locales. This is my folder for my English. This is my folder for my German. And this is my folder for my French. And so you end up, because you don't want to have multiple instances of Magellan, you just want to have one instance of the application and the different sets of content. So that's how it works. And it is covered in one of the webinars, but if you want more information, again, our support team will be happy to walk you through that. Well, and that closes up our questions. So, hey guys, it's been really productive webinar. You produced some really great questions, so thank you for that. and hopefully you've seen how straightforward it is to produce a new Magellan site from your WebHelp. So please experiment, have a go. If you have any problems, let us know. I'm hoping to run another one of these webinars in a month or two that will bring some lessons learned from people that have gone through this process, and maybe help the rest of you out that haven't been brave enough to do it yet. In the meantime, if you're interested in anything you saw here that you haven't got, such as the some of the e-learning and other enhancements, or you're interested in looking at cloud, drop a line to Peter on the sales email address. If you have any issues, there's the support email address. You can just email a query there and it will automatically log a support ticket for you. We're recording this webinar and we will make it available on our website tomorrow. And those of you that have registered for this webinar will be sent a link to it. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. And I wish you all a really great rest of your day. And hopefully you'll have a bit of a play with what you've learned today. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.